The envelope was already on her desk when she got to work that morning. Maren didn't touch it right away. She set down her coffee, logged into the system, pulled up the receivables file she'd been staring at for 3 weeks. The one with the number that didn't add up, no matter how many times she ran it. And only then, when she'd done everything she could think of to delay it, did she pick up the envelope. Her name. Typed. Not written. No return address. Inside was a single check for $42,000 made out to Maren Calloway, and a note on paper so thick and smooth it felt almost obscene between her fingers. You're being let go. This covers your severance and your silence. HR will need your badge by noon, $42,000. 11 years, that was what they decided she was worth. She sat with that for a moment. The office around her hummed with the sound of people who didn't know yet. Keyboards clicking, someone laughing near the coffee station, the low drone of the HVAC system she'd filed a maintenance request about in February and again in April. Through the glass partition she could see Gerald Finch, her manager, not looking at her. Deliberately not looking at her. He was talking on the phone and nodding, and not once did his eyes drift to where she sat. That was when she understood it wasn't just a layoff. She'd found the discrepancy 3 weeks ago. A routing number that didn't match. Transfers moving through a shell account she shouldn't have been able to see, except that she was the one who had built the reconciliation spreadsheet 4 years ago, and she knew where every formula pointed. $41 million, moved in increments small enough to avoid automated flags. Over the course of 14 months, she'd flagged it to Gerald. Gerald had told her she was misreading the data. She'd rerun the numbers. She'd printed the backup. She'd sent Gerald an email. One email, carefully worded with the attachments. That email had apparently arrived somewhere other than Gerald's inbox. Maren folded the note, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in her tote bag next to her water bottle, and the granola bar she still hadn't eaten, and the tiny framed photo of her mother she kept on her desk, because her mother had told her, before she died, to always work somewhere she felt proud of. She took her mug off the desk. She was almost to the door when Gerald finally said her name. She didn't turn around, and she drove home with the radio off. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and other people's cooking, and when she got inside, she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands for a long time. She had $63 in her checking account. She had a student loan that still owed more than her car. She had a reference from a company that had just handed her a severance check that felt more like a threat than a gift. The check sat on the kitchen counter. She didn't touch it. The job listing found her the way strange things tend to find people who are desperate. At 2 a.m, on the 3rd page of a search she almost didn't run, with a title vague enough that she almost scrolled past it. Accounting analyst, contract position, discretion required, compensation, negotiable. No company name, a P.O. box in the financial district, an email address that was just a string of letters and numbers. Any sensible person would have closed the tab. Maren sent her resume at 2:17 a.m. She heard back in 4 minutes, which should have told her something. The reply was brief. An address, a time, 2 days from now, 10 a.m. Bring your work, that was all it said. No name, no pleasantries, no indication of what the work actually was. She spent the next day trying to talk herself out of going. She updated her LinkedIn profile. She applied to 6 normal jobs through normal channels. She called her friend Petra, the only person she would have told. But Petra was in the middle of moving and could barely hear her over the sound of boxes being dragged across hardwood floors, so Maren said it was nothing and hung up. She went. The address turned out to be a building on the edge of the financial district that looked like every other glass and steel tower, except that the lobby had no directory listing, and the security desk had 2 guards instead of 1, and they were expecting her by name. One of them walked her to an elevator, pressed a button without telling her which floor. The doors opened onto a hallway with dark wood paneling and no windows, and the kind of silence that felt deliberate, like the building itself was holding its breath. A woman in a grey suit met her at the end of the hall. Compact, professional, eyes that moved fast. "Mrs. Calloway, yes, he's ready for you." Maren didn't ask who he was. She followed the woman through a set of double doors and into an office that was larger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a city that suddenly seemed very small. The man standing at the window didn't turn around when she entered. She noticed the suit first. Dark charcoal, the kind of fabric that absorbed light, then the breadth of his shoulders, then the way he stood, not like someone waiting, but like someone who had already decided how the next 10 minutes would go and was simply allowing time to catch up. When he turned, she understood why no one had told her his name. You didn't need to ask his name, it was in the way a room rearranged itself around him. He was older than she'd expected. Not old, mid-40s maybe, though it was difficult to tell. There was a scar that ran from his left jaw toward his ear, thin and white and so well integrated into his face that it almost looked intentional. His eyes were the color of slate, with the same efficiency she imagined he applied to everything, cataloging, weighing, deciding. "Calloway," he said. "Not a question. Yes." "Sit down." She sat. He didn't. He picked up a folder from his desk and set it in front of her without opening it. "I'm going to tell you what you're looking at," he said, "and then you're going to tell me what you see." She opened the folder. The documents inside were dense: ledgers, transfer records, account summaries, the kind of paperwork that would have made most people's eyes glaze over in 30 seconds. Maren's eyes did not glaze over. They moved quickly, tracking columns, checking for the places where numbers did what numbers don't do when everything is honest. She found the first one in 40 seconds. The second in under a minute. She looked up. The man, she still didn't have a name, was watching her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite approval. Something more controlled than either. "These transfers," she said. "The routing on the third column doesn't match the receiving institution. Someone ran them through a pass-through. Look, here and here, and whoever set it up assumed no one would cross-reference the timestamps." She turned the page. They almost got away with it. The amounts are staggered well. But the timing pattern repeats every 11 days, which means it's automated, which means there's a source file somewhere with the schedule in it. "If you find that file—" "We found it," he said, 3 days ago. "What we don't have is a full reconstruction of where the money went. That's because they stripped the trail at the pass-through. But the timestamps still exist in the originating records, and if those haven't been altered, they haven't." She set the folder down. "Who did this to you?" Something shifted in his face, just slightly. "A partner," he said. "Former." Maren thought about Gerald not looking at her. She thought about the envelope on her desk, and the check on her kitchen counter that she still hadn't deposited, and the email she'd sent that had apparently landed somewhere very far from where it was addressed. "What's the job?" she said. He sat down then, across from her, and for the first time she felt the full weight of his attention. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was the feeling of being assessed the way a building is assessed. Not for beauty, not for comfort, but for structural integrity, for whether you would hold under pressure. "I need someone who can reconstruct the full movement of funds across 18 months, he said. "Every account, every transfer, every holding point. I need documentation that could survive scrutiny, and I need it done quietly and quickly, because there are people who would prefer this information not exist. That's not a 2-week project. No, it's not. How long? However long it takes to do it correctly." She studied him. He was not the kind of man who gave away what he was thinking. But she had spent 11 years reading numbers, and numbers, she had learned, were just decisions recorded on paper. You could always read a decision if you knew where to look. "You know I was fired 3 weeks ago," she said, "from Aldridge Capital." "I know why." She was quiet for a moment. "Then you know I found something I wasn't supposed to find. I know that someone paid to make you disappear quietly. He said that you took the severance but didn't cash the check." That stopped her. "How do you know that?" "Because you're here," he said simply. His name, she found out later, was Vane, just Vane. The woman in the grey suit, whose name was Theodora and who had the most precisely organized calendar Maren had ever seen, referred to him that way without hesitation, without a first name, without a title. Just Vane. The way you referred to weather. The way you referred to a landmark. He set her up in an office 2 floors below his. It had a window that looked out at a concrete wall, which she didn't mind because she didn't need a view to work. What she needed was the data, and the data was already waiting for her, organized into external drives that Theodora deposited on the desk without ceremony. "Everything we have," Theodora said. "What you need that isn't there, submit a request in writing." "In writing to who?" Theodora looked at her the way people look at someone who has asked a question with an obvious answer. "To Vane." Maren unpacked her laptop. She opened the first drive. She started working. She did not think about what kind of company this was. She thought about it later, alone in her apartment, when the city had gone quiet enough that she could hear her own thoughts without interference. She thought about the security desk and the windowless hallway and the way the 2 men she'd passed on the way out had looked through her the way men trained to look through people. Looked through people. She thought about Vane, saying, "I know why," in a tone that suggested his knowledge was not accidental. She thought about the $41 million her former employer had moved through a shell account over 14 months. She thought about the fact that she had spent 11 years working somewhere that had handed her an envelope one morning and told her to be gone by noon. And then she thought about the numbers she'd seen in that folder, the pattern, the precision, the person who had built something that complicated and then walked away from it, stolen from it, and assumed no one would ever have the skill to trace it back. She opened her laptop and kept working. She'd been there for 3 weeks when Vane appeared in the doorway of her office at 7:40 in the evening. She looked up. He looked at the wall of handwritten notes she'd taped above her desk, a timeline, color-coded, tracking 14 months of movement across 37 accounts. "You color-code," he said. "I think in patterns," she said. "Color helps." He came into the office then. For the first time since she'd started, he stood at her desk, not behind her, and studied the wall. "Tell me where you are," he said. She told him. She walked him through the reconstruction, account by account, the logic of the trail, the 3 points where it split and then converged, the shell entity that had been registered in the Caymans under a name that cross-referenced to a law firm in Delaware that had been dissolved in March. She spoke the way she always spoke when she was inside a problem, precisely, without decoration, cutting to what mattered. When she finished, Vane was quiet for a moment. "You said 3 points where the trail splits," he said. "Show me the second one." She turned to the wall, pointed. "Here, the transfer on October 9th, the amount gets divided into 4 equal parts, which is unusual because the previous pattern used uneven amounts to avoid ratio detection. Someone made a decision on that date. Either the original architect wasn't the one running this transaction, or something changed that required a cleaner split. My guess is the latter. Why? Because of this." She pulled a printed sheet from the stack on her desk. 3 days earlier, October 6th, one of the pass-through accounts received a transfer from an entity I can't trace yet. Small amount, 50,000. It doesn't belong to the pattern. It came from somewhere else, and whoever sent it knew where to send it, which means they knew the account existed. She handed it to him. "You had more than one person involved." Vane took the paper, read it, set it down. He looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men look at women, or not only that, the way someone looks at a variable they hadn't factored into their calculation. "How long until you have the full reconstruction?" he said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Some of the originating records are incomplete and I need the backup files from the pass-through institution, which is going to require a contact who can pull records that aren't publicly accessible. I'll get you the contact." "Okay." He was almost to the door when she said, "Who was the partner?" He stopped. "The one who did this," she said. "You said former partner. You didn't say his name." Vane turned. In the low light of her office, with the city visible in the concrete wall's reflection and her color-coded timeline behind her, he looked like something carved from the same material as the building. Dense and unreadable and shaped by pressure she couldn't see. "Does it matter?" he said. "Professionally, no. Personally?" She held his gaze. "I'd like to know what kind of person I'm building a case against." A pause, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "The kind," he said, "who takes what people trust him with and finds the precise moment when it's most valuable to walk away with it." Maren thought about Gerald again, about the envelope, about 11 years of work that someone had decided was worth $42,000 and a note on thick paper. "I know that kind," she said. He left. She turned back to her wall. The contact Vane sent her was a man named Aldrich, who communicated exclusively by encrypted message, and who within 48 hours had provided her with records she'd been told did not exist. She did not ask how he had them. She cross-referenced them against her existing data and watched the trail clarify the way an image clarifies when you adjust the focus. Slowly, then all at once. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3.5 weeks in, she found it, the source file, the master account. The name on the registration. She sat with it for a long time. Then she called Theodora. "I need 10 minutes with Vane," she said. "He's in a meeting. Tell him I found the name." She had the 10 minutes within the hour. Vane's office was different in the late afternoon. The city through the windows was going amber, and the light moved differently across the room, softer, less austere, though Vane himself remained exactly as she had first seen him. Contained, deliberate, present in the way that people are present when they are used to a room rearranging around them. Maren put the folder on his desk. "Driscoll," she said, "your former partner's name is on the master account, but that's not who ran it. He was the front. The person who built the structure, who designed the pass-through, set the automation, registered the shell, is a woman named Alara Finch." Something moved across Vane's face. Not surprise. The absence of surprise in someone who had suspected this but hadn't said so yet. "She worked for you," Maren said. 12 years. "She's good," Maren said, and she meant it, because she could see the architecture of what Alara had built, and it was precise and creative, and if you didn't know exactly where to look, you would never have found the seam. "The structure she designed is one of the cleaner things I've seen. If whoever ran the October 9th transfer hadn't changed the split ratio." She stopped. She would have gotten away with it. Vane looked at the folder. But she didn't. No. He looked up at her then, and for the first time since she'd walked into this building, the assessment in his eyes had been replaced by something she couldn't immediately name, something that had more weight to it. "What you've done here," he said, "is work that I was told couldn't be done, at least not in this time frame, at least not by one person." Maren said nothing. "I'd like to talk about what comes next," he said. "For the case. For you, she hadn't expected that. She didn't show it. Because she'd learned early that showing surprise in a room like this was the same as showing a hand. "I'm still working for you," she said. "The contract was for the reconstruction," he said. "That's done. What I'm asking is different." He set the folder aside. "I have accounts across 9 entities. The people who manage them are competent. None of them found what you found in that folder in 40 seconds. They weren't looking for it. You were, even before you knew what you were looking at." He paused. "That's not a skill you train. It's a way of thinking." She looked at him, the scar along his jaw, the slate-colored eyes that had catalogued her the first moment she walked in and hadn't stopped cataloguing her since. "What exactly are you asking?" she said. "I'm asking if you want to stay." She thought about her apartment, the $63, which had since become a different number, but not a comfortable one. The check from Aldridge Capital, which she had still not deposited, which sat on her counter like an accusation. The job listings she had bookmarked and not applied to. The reference she didn't have anymore from a company she didn't want to name. She thought about this office, the problems she'd been given, the clarity of a ledger that told the truth if you knew how to read it. "Doing what exactly?" she said. "What you've been doing, but with full access, full resources, and a number that is not $42,000. She held his gaze for a long moment. She said. Something happened to his face then. It was not a smile, quite. It was the easing of something that had been held very still for a very long time. "Would expect nothing less," he said. The contract Theodore slid across her desk 2 days later was 15 pages. Maren read all 15. She marked 4 clauses. She sent them back with notes. Vane's response came within the hour. 3 of the 4 clauses amended. 1 held, with a handwritten note in the margin that said, "This one stays. Everything else, yours." She signed it. She did not deposit the Aldridge check that night. She shredded it instead, standing over the kitchen trash in the quiet of her apartment, watching it come apart in strips. It felt less like closure than like the clearing of a ledge. Like getting rid of something you'd been holding onto, not because you wanted it, but because you didn't know yet what you were waiting for instead. She did not go in the next morning thinking everything was settled. She was not naive enough for that. She went in thinking about the 9 entities, and the accounts she hadn't seen yet, and the shape of a problem she hadn't been handed yet. She went in thinking about the woman named Alara, who had built something beautiful and dishonest, and had almost gotten away with it. She went in thinking about the master account and the name on the registration and all the things that number had been used to do that she still didn't that entirely know. She went in thinking about Vane. Not in the way she would have told herself she wasn't thinking about him. In the honest way. The way you thought about a variable you hadn't solved for yet, with attention, with wariness, with the particular alertness of someone who recognized that a problem was not simple even when it appeared to have an answer. Theodora handed her a coffee without being asked and said, "He wants to see you at 9. About what? He didn't say. Maren took the coffee. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the floor above hers, the one she'd never been to except that first day, and rode up in the mirrored silence. The doors opened. Vane was at the window again, where he always seemed to be, watching the city with the patience of someone who had learned that most things eventually became visible if you watched long enough. He didn't turn around when she entered. This time, she didn't wait for him. She crossed the office, stood beside him, and looked out at the city too. The morning light was doing something with the glass towers across the street, fracturing, doubling, making the city look like 2 versions of itself, layered on top of each other. "You wanted to see me," she said. "There's a new file," he said. "More complicated than the last one." "How much more complicated?" "You'll tell me, once you've seen it." She turned to look at him then, the scar, the slate eyes, the stillness of him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The city continued below them. Somewhere in it, in a building she'd given 11 years to, as someone was sitting at a desk and not looking at the person they'd decided to disappear. In a Cayman registry, a name she'd found sat attached to an account that no longer had anything to hide in it. And here, on the floor above her office, in a room with windows and no answers yet, Maren stood next to the most dangerous kind of man she'd ever met, the kind who kept his word in writing, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could account for, that the number at the bottom of the ledger might actually balance. "Show me the file," she said.